Imagine you are floating at a window that should not exist, a pane of thick glass with hard vacuum on the other side, the whole earth turning silently far below you. From here, the sky you have known your entire life quietly stops making sense. The sun comes up and goes down 16 times in a single day. The dark air beneath you glows a faint green, all on its own, for no reason you were ever taught. Lightning leaps upward off the tops of the storms, climbing towards space in colours that barely have names. And when you come back inside from a walk in the emptiness, the void has left a smell on your gloves, something like hot metal and seared steak. Every one of those things is real, and every one of them was reported by an astronaut, someone chosen for being calm, trained not to imagine things, one of the most reliable witnesses we have. Tonight we're going to count down 15 of the impossible things they have seen out there, and I will tell you now, before we begin, that the single most impossible thing on this whole list was never outside the window at all. Get comfortable. If you're the kind of person who loves having your sense of the ordinary quietly taken apart, a quick like and subscribe genuinely helps this channel reach more curious minds like you. Because by the end of tonight, the calm sky you think you know is going to feel a great deal less empty. Now, let's gently drift into this. Consider for a moment the kind of person we send into space. We do not send dreamers or the easily frightened. We send test pilots, engineers, physicians and scientists, and before we send them we spend years measuring how calmly they behave when something goes wrong. We put them in centrifuges and in dark tanks of water. We fill their days with checklists and emergencies and simulated failures, and we watch, quietly, to see who panics and who simply keeps reading the instruments. The people who make it through are, by any honest measure, some of the most level-headed observers our species has ever produced. They are trained, more than almost anyone alive, not to imagine things. That is the detail I want you to hold on to tonight, because it changes everything that follows. When a person like that comes back down and tells you that they saw something that should not be possible, you are not listening to a campfire story or a blurry video from a stranger's phone. You are listening to one of the most reliable witnesses we have. And it turns out that these particular witnesses, once we finally lifted them above the air and out into the dark, came back with a very strange list. They reported light with no source. They reported weather running the wrong way. They reported a smell where there should be nothing to smell, colours that no photograph has ever gotten right, and, in a handful of cases, things that the people who saw them still cannot entirely explain. Tonight we are going to walk through 15 of those things, counting down from the merely astonishing to the genuinely impossible. And I will tell you now, before we begin, that the single most impossible thing on this whole list was never outside the window at all. It was light that seemed to come from nothing, appearing inside a closed human eye in a sealed and shielded cabin, with no lamp and no leak and no explanation anyone could point to. We will get there. I am going to make you wait for it, the way the astronauts had to wait for the answer themselves. But by the end of tonight, you will understand exactly what it was, and why it is the one sight on this list that reaches all the way through the glass, and through the metal, and through you. Let us begin gently then, with something that sounds almost too simple to belong on a list of impossible things, and yet quietly breaks the oldest clock a human being owns. A spacecraft in low orbit around the Earth, like the space station where people live and work today, circles the entire planet in roughly 90 minutes. Take a slow breath, and let that number settle, because it is stranger than it first sounds. 90 minutes is about the length of a long meal, or a walk in the park, or a single film with the slow parts left in. In the time it takes you to do one of those ordinary things down here, an astronaut up there has gone all the way around the world, and that means, over the course of a single 24-hour day, the crew does not see one sunrise and one sunset. They see about 16 of each, 16 sunrises, 16 sunsets, in one day. Think about what that does to something as basic as the feeling of a day. Every living thing on this planet is built around the rhythm of the sun coming up and going down. Our bodies keep time by it. Our sleep, our hunger, our moods, the ancient chemistry of being awake and being tired, all of it is tuned to that one great daily wave of light and dark. It is the first clock any of us ever knew, older than any calendar, older than language. And up there, that clock does not slow down or speed up in some gentle way. It shatters into 16 pieces. The sun rushes up over the edge of the world, floods everything with hard white light, and then, less than an hour later, drops back down, and the world goes black again. Over and over, all day and all night, with no relation whatsoever to whether the person watching feels that it is morning or midnight. The astronauts have to invent their own time up there, because the sky refuses to give it to them. They keep to a schedule set by mission control, on a single agreed clock, precisely because if they tried to live by the light outside the window, they would lose their minds inside a few days. Your body's oldest instinct, the one that says the number of sunrises is the number of days, simply stops being true, and the sunrises and sunsets themselves do not look the way they do from the ground. Down here, a sunset is a slow and generous thing. The sun sinks over many minutes, the colours bleed across half the sky, and the light softens by degrees so gradually that you rarely notice the exact moment day becomes night. Up there, above the thick blanket of air that stretches all of that out, the whole event is compressed into a matter of seconds. The sun does not sink so much as fall, and the line between the lit half of the world and the dark half is not a soft hour-long blur. It is a sharp, curved edge, racing across the surface of the planet at thousands of miles an hour. That line has a name. It is called the Terminator, the boundary between day and night, and from orbit you can actually see it as a distinct thing, a moving wall of shadow sweeping over oceans and continents. On the ground, you live inside the Terminator every single evening without ever perceiving it, because you are standing on it as it passes, and it takes an hour to cross you. From above, you watch it travel. You can see, in one glance, a band of afternoon, a band of dusk, and a band of deep night, all laid out across the curve of the earth at the same instant, with that knife edge of shadow gliding between them. And then there is the small jewel-like detail that sits right at the top of each of those rushing sunsets. Astronauts, again and again, report seeing something called the green flash far more easily than any of us ever will down here. The green flash is a brief flick of pure green light at the very last sliver of the setting sun. On Earth, it is one of the rarest prizes in all of sky watching. People travel to coastlines with perfectly clean horizons and wait for years to catch a single one. It happens because the atmosphere acts like a weak prism, bending and separating the sun's light into its colours, and for a fraction of a second, under just the right conditions, the green part of that spread is all that is left visible as the disk vanishes. From orbit, with the geometry so favourable and 16 chances a day, that once-in-a-lifetime green spark becomes something the crew can watch again and again, a small emerald signature at the death of every orbital day. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes with this, one the early crews had to learn to manage. The human body, deprived of its single daily sun, begins to drift. Sleep does not come when the sky says night, because the sky says night 16 times a day, and means none of them. The crews found that they had to build night out of nothing but discipline, darkening the windows, keeping to the numbers on the clock, telling their own bodies when to be tired because the world outside would no longer tell them. And even then, some of them lay awake in their sleeping bags in the false dark, feeling the wrongness of it, the deep animal sense that something fundamental about time had been taken away. It is one of the quietest costs of leaving the planet, and it is worth naming because it shows how deep these things go. The 16 sunrises are not just a pretty fact. They are the first sign that a human being up there is living in a place their body was never designed to understand, a place where even the meaning of a single day has to be manufactured by hand. None of this, I want to be clear, breaks any law of physics. The 90-minute orbit is nothing more than speed and gravity in balance. The knife-edge Terminator is just what a shadow looks like when you're far enough away to see the whole of it moving. The green flash is ordinary sunlight, sorted by colour as it grazes the last thin edge of the air. Every piece of it has a clean and simple explanation. And that is exactly the point I want to make with this very first entry, because it sets the pattern for everything to come. The thing that feels impossible here is not a violation of nature. It is your own deepest intuition being quietly corrected. The sense that a day is one sunrise and one sunset is not a fact about the universe. It is a fact about standing still on the surface of one particular planet. Lift yourself off that surface, and the truth that was hiding underneath is that time, as your body counts it, was always a local arrangement. We are going to keep pulling on that thread all night, because the calm, familiar sky you know, the one with a single daily sun and a soft, slow dusk, turns out to be a heavily edited version of reality, And the further we go, the more of those edits we are going to peel away. The next one is going to take the darkness itself, the plain black emptiness you think of as nothing at all, and show you that it has been glowing the entire time. Everyone believes the same simple thing about the night. The night is dark. When the sun goes down and the sky drains to black, we assume that black is empty, an absence of light, a great nothing hanging over us until the sun returns. It is one of the most basic assumptions a person can have about the world, and it is so obvious that we never think to question it. And yet the astronauts, looking down at the night side of the Earth from above, kept photographing something that should not be there. Along the curve of the dark planet, even in places with no cities, no moon, and no storms, there is a thin band of light, a faint glowing rind wrapped around the edge of the world. Usually it is a soft green. Sometimes there are layers of red or gold stacked above it. It is not city light. It shows up over empty oceans and unpopulated deserts. It is not moonlight because it is there on moonless nights. It is not an aurora because it appears far from the poles ringing the whole planet. It is the atmosphere itself, the air, glowing quietly in the dark. And once you know it is there, you cannot unlearn it. The empty night is not empty. The air above your head is very softly on fire with light, and has been every single night of your life. The name for it is airglow, and the reason for it is a slow and rather beautiful piece of chemistry happening high above the weather, up around 90 to 100 kilometers over your head, which is roughly 60 miles straight up. During the day, the sun does something violent to the upper air that we never see. Its ultraviolet light is powerful enough to tear molecules apart, splitting oxygen molecules into single oxygen atoms and knocking other atoms and molecules into high-energy excited states. All day long, the top of the atmosphere is being broken and charged up by sunlight, storing energy in a great invisible reservoir of split-apart pieces. Then night comes, and the pieces begin to find their way back together. Slowly, in the dark, those lonely oxygen atoms recombine, and excited atoms settle back down to their calm, low-energy states. And here is the crucial part. When a piece of the atmosphere drops back down to a lower energy, it has to give up the energy it was holding, and it gives it up as light. Each of those tiny settlings releases a tiny flash of a very specific colour. Add up countless trillions of them across the whole sky, and you get a steady, gentle glow. The green comes mostly from those oxygen atoms, releasing a particular shade that happens to be the exact same green you find in the lower parts of the aurora. The atmosphere, having swallowed the sun's energy all day, spends all night quietly breathing it back out as light. From the ground, you will almost never notice this, and there is a simple reason. Airglow is faint, and we have drowned it. Under the flood of streetlights and headlights and glowing windows that fill the modern night, a whisper of green from 60 miles up does not stand a chance. Even under a genuinely dark country sky, airglow is subtle, often mistaken for the last traces of twilight or a distant town beyond the horizon. But take away the ground, take away the city, and put a human being above it all in the blackness of orbit, and there it is, unmistakable. A permanent halo of light around the entire planet, produced by nothing but the air recovering from a day in the sun. Sit with how strange that is. The two things you are most sure of about the empty night, that it is dark and that the air between you and the stars is simply clear and transparent, are both gently wrong. The dark is not fully dark. The clear air is not merely clear. It is glowing, faintly, all the time, everywhere, and you have simply been standing too far underneath it, and under too many lights of your own making to have ever seen your own sky shine. And airglow is only the beginning of what the upper air can do, because if you climb your gaze just a little higher, to the very doorway of space, you find something even harder to believe. You find clouds. But not ordinary clouds. The highest clouds on the entire planet, glowing an electric, silvery blue in a sky that has already gone dark for everyone below. These are called noctilucent clouds, and the word itself tells you what makes them impossible. Noctilucent means, quite literally, night shining. They form at an altitude of around 80 to 85 kilometers, which is close to 50 miles up. To put that in some kind of human scale, an airliner cruises at around 10 kilometers, roughly 6 or 7 miles. These clouds float at more than 8 times that height, at the ragged edge where the atmosphere thins away into space itself. Nothing that we normally call a cloud has any business being up there. The ordinary clouds you know, the ones that bring rain and shade and weather, All live down in the lowest layer of the air a few kilometres up at most. Noctilucent clouds ride so high above them that they are almost not part of the weather at all, and they glow after dark. That is the part that stops astronauts, and the rare ground observers who catch them, in their tracks. When the sun sets for you on the ground, the ordinary clouds above you go grey and then black, because the sunlight that was lighting them has been cut off by the curve of the Earth. But noctilucent clouds sit so high that, for a while after your local sunset, the sun is still shining on them from below your horizon. You're in darkness. The clouds 50 miles above you are still in sunlight, catching those last low rays and throwing them back down as a rippling luminous pale blue web against the night. From orbit, the astronauts see them as a delicate glowing layer, floating above all the ordinary weather, silhouetted against the darkening edge of the world like something that does not belong to this planet at all. What are they made of? So high up, in a place so cold and so dry that ordinary clouds cannot exist. They are made of ice, tiny crystals of it, forming on even tinier specks of dust. And here is a detail that quietly connects tonight's list back onto itself. Some of that dust is thought to be the vaporized remains of meteors. When a shooting star burns up in the upper atmosphere, it leaves behind a fine smoke of microscopic particles, and those particles can drift and serve as the seeds on which these ice crystals grow. So the most beautiful clouds on Earth may be built, in part, from the ashes of dying meteors, freezing into glowing blue ripples at the very border of space. Remember that, because in a few minutes we are going to meet those meteors from the other side. There is one more unsettling thing about these clouds. They appear to be becoming more common and spreading to lower latitudes over recent decades. Once they were seen mostly in the far north and far south. Now they are turning up further from the poles than they used to. That drift is being studied carefully because a change in the highest, thinnest part of our atmosphere may be a faint signal of much larger changes happening far below, down where all of us actually live. A glowing blue cloud at the edge of space might be trying to tell us something about the air at the bottom. There is a lovely irony folded into these first glowing entries, and it is worth naming because it will keep returning tonight. We tend to think of space as the place where you finally escape the interference of the atmosphere and see clearly. And in many ways that is true. But these first sights are not things you see in spite of the atmosphere. They are the atmosphere, revealed. The air glow is our own air shining. The noctilucent clouds are our own water, frozen at the edge of our own sky. Even the aurora, which we are about to meet properly, is our own air lit up by the sun. The astronaut, floating in the black, looks back and sees the living, breathing, glowing envelope of the Earth, doing things that from underneath we never suspected it was doing at all. The first impossible things are not alien. They are intimate. They are home, seen from the outside for the first time, and turning out to be far more alive than we ever knew. So here is where we stand, only 2 steps into the countdown. The empty dark of night is glowing with airglow. The highest reaches of the sky hold clouds that shine after sunset, lit from beneath the horizon, built partly from the dust of burned meteors. Twice now, the thing you were most certain was nothing, the plain dark air, has turned out to be quietly full of light. Hold on to that feeling, because we are going to keep finding it, again and again, all the way up. And the next entry is going to take one of the most familiar and beloved sights in the whole night sky, the shooting star, and show it to you from a place no wisher on the ground has ever stood. From above. Everyone who has ever looked up on a clear dark night knows the feeling. A point of a light streaks across the sky, quick and silent, there and then gone, and something in your chest lifts before you can even think. A shooting star. We wish on them. We gasp at them. We wait through cold hours of meteor showers hoping to catch a good one, and in every single one of those moments, without ever questioning it, we know exactly where the shooting star is. It is up. It is above us, out toward the stars, a bright scratch of light drawn across the ceiling of the world. That is simply what a meteor is, a thing that happens overhead. Now put yourself in orbit and watch that certainty turn completely upside down. Because the astronauts looking down from the space station do not see shooting stars overhead. They see them below. They watch meteors flare and die beneath the spacecraft, between the window and the ground, streaks of fire igniting against the dark curve of the nighttime Earth. The most reliably up thing in the entire sky, the shooting star, is suddenly down, and the person watching it is on the far side of it, looking down onto the tops of the falling flames. To understand why, You have to know what a shooting star actually is, because it is not a star at all, and it is much smaller and much closer than most people imagine. A meteor is usually nothing more than a fragment of rock or metal or dust, and very often it is astonishingly tiny, no larger than a grain of sand or a small pebble. What makes something so small produce a streak of light bright enough to see from the ground is speed. These fragments are the leftover crumbs of comets and asteroids, and they are moving through space at tremendous velocity. When one of them meets the Earth, it slams into the upper atmosphere at tens of thousands of miles an hour, so fast that it compresses and superheats the air in front of it, and that shock of blazing air is what glows. The tiny grain itself usually vaporizes completely. The light you see is not really the rock burning. It is the air itself, set on fire by something the size of a seed moving faster than any bullet. And all of that drama, the flash and the streak and the death of the little fragment, happens at an altitude of roughly 70 to 100 kilometers, which is around 40 to 60 miles up. That is high. It is far above the clouds, far above the airliners, up in the same thin, rarefied zone where the airglow shines, and just below where those noctilucent clouds float. But here is the thing that inverts everything. The space station orbits at around 400 kilometers, roughly 250 miles up. The meteors burn up well beneath it, so when an astronaut on the station looks down toward the Earth at night and a meteor happens to streak below them, they are quite literally above the shooting star watching it fall away toward the planet. Try to actually picture what that is like, because it rearranges your entire sense of your place in the world. You're floating in the dark and the enormous night side of the Earth is spread out below you, a black expanse scattered with the orange constellations of human cities, and then, down there, between you and all of it, a spark ignites and draws a brief line of fire across the darkness before winking out. You did not look up to see it. You looked down. During the great annual meteor showers, when the Earth plows through a dense stream of comet debris, astronauts have described seeing several of these flashes in quick succession, points of light kindling and dying over the night side of the planet, a slow scattering of sparks falling toward a world you're no longer standing on. It is worth lingering on the meteor showers in particular, because they sharpen the strangeness. A few times a year, the Earth in its orbit plows through a dense river of debris left behind by a comet, and the sky fills with shooting stars dozens an hour, sometimes more. Down on the ground, people lie back on blankets in the cold and count them, and each streak overhead draws a small sound of delight from the crowd. Those same nights, an astronaut passing over that part of the world sees the other side of the show. They see the sparks igniting below them, scattered across the dark curve of the planet, dozens of tiny fires kindling and dying against the continents. The very same meteors, the very same night. Two audiences separated by a couple hundred kilometers of air, one looking up and wishing, one looking down and wondering, and neither of them able to see the other, both of them watching the same brief fires burn in the same thin shell of sky. There is something quietly profound in that image, and it is worth pausing on, because it is the first time on this list that the impossible thing is not really about some exotic object at all. It is about position. It is about where you are standing, or rather where you are floating. The meteor is completely ordinary. It is the same shooting star that a child on the ground might be wishing on at that very moment. Nothing about the physics has changed. What has changed is that you are on the other side of it. You are above the very layer of falling fire that makes the night sky feel magical from below. The wish and the wisher in that instant are on opposite sides of the same thin shell of air, and you are the one looking down. And that inversion is a rehearsal. It is a small, gentle version of a much larger turning that this whole night is building toward. Right now, being above the shooting stars feels like a curiosity, a neat trick of altitude. But hold the shape of it in your mind, because we are going to come back to this idea of the observer's position flipping, of the ceiling becoming a floor, again and again, and each time it is going to go a little deeper. The next time, in fact, it happens on a scale so enormous that the thing being looked down upon is not a single spark, but a curtain of light the size of a continent. Because there is another kind of light that lives up at those same altitudes, in that same thin upper air where the meteors burn and the airglow shines. It is a light that people have travelled to the ends of the earth to stand beneath, tilting their heads all the way back to watch it ripple across the top of the sky. And the astronauts once again get to see it from the one impossible angle that none of those travellers ever will. They get to look down into it. There is a certain kind of pilgrimage that people make. They save their money and they travel to the cold edges of the world, to northern Norway or Iceland or the top of Canada, and they stand outside in the freezing dark, sometimes for many nights in a row, all for the chance to see one thing. They are chasing the aurora, the northern lights, the shimmering curtains of green and red that hang in the polar sky. And when the lights finally come, when the sky begins to glow and ripple and dance overhead, people weep. They fall silent. Grown adults describe it as one of the great experiences of their lives, and in every one of those moments, the aurora is above them. It is the ceiling of the world lighting up. You stand at the bottom of it and you look up, and the light is always up there, draped across the roof of the sky. The astronauts do not look up at the aurora, they look down at it, and more than that, on the most active nights they fly through the very tops of it. Sit with that for a moment, because it upends the same certainty we just overturned with the meteors, but now on a scale that is almost impossible to hold in the mind. From the space station, the aurora is not a glow on the ceiling, it is a structure, it is a landscape. The crew looks down and sees enormous sheets and curtains of coloured light draped over the polar regions of the Earth, seen from the top rather than the bottom, so that for the first time their true three-dimensional shape is revealed. From the ground, the aurora looks like a flat glowing veil, because you are seeing it edge on from far below. From above, you can see that those curtains have height and depth and folds, that they hang down toward the Earth like enormous luminous drapes, rippling and shifting, some of them reaching up toward the very spacecraft that is watching them, and that is the detail that truly stops people. The space station's orbit carries it to high enough latitudes, and the tallest auroras reach up high enough that the astronauts have described the topmost tendrils of the light coming up to meet them, so that the station appears to skim just above or even brush into the highest reaches of the glow. Imagine that. Imagine being inside the thing that people on Earth are staring up at in wonder, passing through its upper edges as it towers up from the planet below you. The ceiling of the world, the roof that humanity has looked up at with reverence for all of history, becomes, for these few people, a glowing country that they fly over and dip into. What is actually happening to make this light is worth understanding, because it connects directly back to the glowing air we have already met, and it also opens a door to something we will need later. The aurora is the visible signature of a battle between the sun and the Earth. The sun does not only give off light, it also throws off a constant stream of charged particles, electrons and protons, a thin wind of them blowing outward through the solar system, and it sometimes hurls out great gusts and eruptions of them during storms on its surface. When that stream of charged particles reaches the Earth, most of it is turned aside by our planet's magnetic field, an invisible shield that wraps around the whole world. But that shield is not a solid dome. It funnels the incoming particles toward the north and south magnetic poles, channeling them down into the upper atmosphere in great rings around the top and bottom of the planet. And when those particles, guided down by the magnetic field, finally crash into the atoms of the upper air, they do the same thing sunlight does during the day. They knock those atoms into excited, high-energy states, and just like with the airglow, when those atoms settle back down, they release the energy as light of very particular colours. Oxygen, struck at lower altitudes, glows that same familiar green. Oxygen higher up glows a deep red. Nitrogen adds blues and purples along the lower edges of the curtains. So the aurora is, in a sense, the airglow's louder and wilder sibling. It is the same essential process, atoms in the upper air lit up and releasing coloured light, but instead of the gentle all-over glow of the atmosphere breathing out the day's stored sunlight, the aurora is a concentrated, dramatic assault. The upper air lit up along the lines where the Earth's magnetic field is pouring the sun's particles down into it. The astronauts who have described flying over a strong aurora reach, again and again, for the language of disbelief. They talk about green light that seems to breathe, brightening and dimming in waves, and about the way the curtains ripple as though a wind were moving through them, though there is no wind up there to move anything. They describe reds glowing above the greens, the colours sorted by height, and they describe the eerie sensation of watching the tops of the tallest structures rise toward the spacecraft, so that for a moment it feels as though the station is going to sail directly into a wall of light. And they describe the silence of it, which is its own strangeness, because a phenomenon so enormous and so violent in its origins, the collision of the sun's own particles with the air, unfolds in complete and total quiet. On Earth we associate great forces with great noise, with thunder and roar. Up there, the sky can be convulsing with light on the scale of a continent, and there is nothing to hear at all, only the hum of the spacecraft and the breathing of the crew, watching a soundless fire the size of a nation pour itself across the top of the world. There is a quiet thread hiding in that description, and I want to plant it now so that it is ready for us later tonight. Notice that the aurora is caused by particles from space, flung out by the sun, passing through the emptiness and then striking a target and producing light. Right now, that target is the upper atmosphere, and the result is a beautiful curtain of colour that astronauts fly over. Hold that basic shape in your mind, a particle from space, crossing the void, hitting something, and making light. It is going to come back at the very end of tonight, in a form far more intimate and far more unsettling, when the target is no longer the sky but a human being, and the light appears not in the atmosphere but inside a closed eye. For now, though, let the aurora be what it is, one of the most beautiful sights our planet produces, and let yourself feel the strangeness of looking down into it. Because that strangeness, again, is really about position, and it is really about the edits that the ground applies to everything. On the surface of the Earth, you're always at the bottom, always looking up, always seeing the underside of the sky. The aurora looks like a ceiling because you are beneath it. The meteors look like they are overhead because you are below them. The stars look like a flat dome because you cannot perceive their depth. All of it, the entire architecture of the night sky as you know it, is a consequence of the one fixed place you have always been forced to stand. Lift a person off that spot, carry them up above the glowing air and the falling meteors and the curtains of the aurora, and the sky reorganizes itself into something with height and depth and structure, something you can look down into and fly through. And once you have accepted that the position of the observer changes everything, you're ready for the next entry, which takes a rule so basic that every child knows it, a rule about which way lightning goes, and shows you that even that was only ever true from where you happened to be standing. Because above the great storms of the world, there is a kind of lightning that does not strike down toward the ground at all. It leaps upward, towards space, in colours and shapes we refused to believe were real, until a human being was finally floating up there to watch it happen. Ask anyone which way lightning goes, and they will not even have to think about it. Lightning goes down. It comes out of the storm clouds and strikes the ground, the tree, the church steeple, the unlucky field. That is the whole terror and the whole meaning of it. Down is where the danger is, down is where the strike lands, and the storm is the dark ceiling above from which the bolts come hammering down. This is one of the most deeply rooted pieces of knowledge a person can have about the natural world. It is in our oldest stories, our oldest fears. Lightning comes down from the sky, and for the entire history of our species, right up until a few decades ago, that was the only kind of lightning we knew. But there were rumours. For most of the 20th century, pilots flying high above thunderstorms would occasionally come back with strange, embarrassed reports. They had seen flashes above the storms, not below them, where lightning belongs, but above the cloud tops, leaping upward into the clear air towards space. Brief bursts of coloured light, reddish or bluish, gone almost before the eye could fix on them, and for decades these reports were quietly filed away and not taken very seriously. They were treated as tall tales, tricks of a tired eye, the kind of thing you do not put in an official record if you want to be taken seriously as a pilot. The problem was that these flashes were incredibly fast, incredibly faint, and happened above storms in places no camera was pointed. So they stayed in the category of legend. Then we put cameras in orbit, and we put careful human observers on the space station, looking straight down on the tops of the world's storms from above, and the legend turned out to be completely real. There is indeed a whole family of lightning that goes the wrong way, upward, away from the ground, reaching toward the edge of space. Scientists call these events by a wonderful umbrella name: transient luminous events. Transient meaning fleeting, luminous meaning glowing. Events because they did not want to commit to calling them anything more specific until they understood them, and they come in several distinct kinds, each stranger than the last. The largest and most famous are called red sprites. A sprite is an enormous reddish burst of light that flickers into being high above a powerful thunderstorm between roughly 40 and 95 kilometers up, which is to say, in the very same upper reaches of the atmosphere where the airglow shines and the meteors burn. Sprites are enormous, sometimes spanning tens of kilometers, and they often take on delicate branching shapes, described as looking like jellyfish, or like glowing red tendrils, or like carrots of light hanging in the sky. And they are almost unbelievably brief. A sprite lasts only a few thousandths of a second, a flicker so fast that the human eye can barely register it, which is exactly why they hid from us for so long. They are triggered by especially powerful lightning strikes in the storm below, a kind of enormous electrical echo blooming upward in the thin high air in response to a great discharge down in the clouds. Then there are blue jets. Where a sprite flickers far above the storm, a blue jet shoots upward directly from the top of the thundercloud, a narrow cone of blue light climbing into the stratosphere, reaching up to around 40 or 50 kilometers before it fades. If a sprite is a ghostly red bloom high in the sky, a blue jet is a bright blue fountain, spraying up out of the storm towards space. And then there is the rarest and most dramatic member of the family, the one that truly deserves the name we give it, the gigantic jet. A gigantic jet is a single colossal discharge that bridges the entire gap between the top of a thunderstorm and the bottom edge of space. It reaches from the cloud tops, around 20 kilometers up, all the way to the ionosphere, the electrified upper layer of the atmosphere near 100 kilometers. In a single flickering instant, it forms a bridge of light connecting the weather to the edge of space itself, carrying a tremendous surge of electrical charge from the storm all the way up into the near vacuum above. These are the giants of the upward lightning world, and they are so rare and so fleeting that to catch one is a genuine event. And in recent years it has been the astronauts more than anyone who have caught them. On the 3rd of July in the year 2025, an astronaut aboard the space station named Nickel Ayers photographed a gigantic jet from orbit, looking down on a storm from above and capturing that impossible bridge of light climbing toward her. Another astronaut from the European agency, named Andreas Mogensen, ran an entire dedicated campaign from the station, deliberately hunting for sprites and jets, photographing them systematically to help scientists finally understand them. And this is the crucial thing. It was the vantage point that made it possible. From the ground, these events are hidden behind and above the very storms that create them. You cannot see the top of a thunderstorm when you're standing underneath it in the rain. But from orbit, looking straight down, the astronaut has a clean, clear view of the storm tops and the thin air above them, exactly where these upward flashes bloom. The one place from which you can reliably watch lightning go up is a place above the sky. It is worth dwelling for a moment on how completely these events overturn our sense of the storm. We think of a thunderstorm as a self-contained thing, a tall dark tower of cloud that makes its rain and hurls its bolts at the ground and then blows itself out. But the transient luminous events reveal that a great storm is not sealed at the top. It is leaking upward. It is reaching, in these brief flickers, all the way to the edge of space, exchanging charge with the electrified upper atmosphere in a conversation we never knew was taking place. The storm is not a closed room with lightning rattling around inside it. It is a node in a much larger electrical system that stretches from the ground to the ionosphere, and the sprites and the jets are the visible signs of that system firing. The tops of the storms talking to the roof of the sky in a language of silent coloured light. For all of human history we stood beneath the storms and thought we understood them, and the whole time, unseen above the clouds, they were sending these enormous soundless signals up towards space, and it took a human being floating even higher, looking down, to finally catch them at it. Let that settle, because it is a beautiful example of the pattern this whole night keeps repeating. A thing was true the entire time. Lightning has been leaping upward off the tops of storms for as long as there have been storms and air, which is to say for billions of years, but we could not see it, because of where we were standing, and because it was too fast and too faint and too well hidden. We even had witnesses, the pilots, telling us it was real, and we brushed them aside because it did not fit what we knew. And then we changed our position. We lifted a careful observer up above it all, and the impossible thing turned out to be ordinary physics that had simply been happening out of sight. The rule that lightning goes down was never a law of nature. It was a description of what you can see from the bottom of the storm. So far, everything on this list has been something you see. The rushing sunrises, the glowing air, the shining clouds, the falling meteors, the curtains of the aurora, the upward lightning. All of it has been light, gathered by the eye. But the next entry breaks even that pattern, because it is not something the astronauts saw at all. It is something they smelled, and it raises a question that sounds at first like a contradiction in terms. What could the emptiest place imaginable, the vacuum of space itself, a place defined by having almost nothing in it, possibly smell like? Here is a fact that sounds, on its face, like nonsense. Space has a smell. Astronauts who go outside the spacecraft on spacewalks come back inside and report, again and again, that space has a distinct and recognizable odor. And this is not one confused person. It is a consistent report, given by many different astronauts across many different missions and many years. And the remarkable thing is how closely their descriptions agree with one another, even when the people describing it have never spoken to each other. They come in from the void, they take off their helmets, and they smell something. The same something. Now, before we go any further, we have to deal with the obvious objection, because it is a good one. Smell, as you know it, requires molecules. When you smell coffee or rain or bread, what is physically happening is that tiny molecules from those things are drifting through the air and landing on the sensitive tissue inside your nose, where they trigger the signals your brain reads as a scent. No molecules, no smell. And space, the vacuum between the worlds, is the closest thing to true emptiness that exists. It is defined by the near-total absence of molecules. So how, in a place with essentially nothing in it, could there possibly be anything to smell? By every rule you know, the vacuum should be the one place in all of existence that has no scent at all, because there is nothing there to reach your nose, and yet the reports are unmistakable. So what is going on? First, let us hear what the astronauts actually say, because the descriptions themselves are part of the strangeness. They do not describe anything floral or sweet or pleasant in the ordinary way. Over and over, they reach for the same rough family of words. They say it smells like seared steak, like meat just hitting a hot pan. They say it smells like hot metal. They say it smells like welding fumes, like the sharp tang of an arc welder in a workshop. They say it smells like burnt gunpowder, like spent fireworks, like ozone, that sharp electrical smell you sometimes catch near old machinery or after a lightning storm. One astronaut, a man named Don Pettit, who is known for his thoughtful descriptions of life in orbit, described it as a rather pleasant, sweet metallic sensation, and said it reminded him specifically of the fumes from an arc welding torch, from summers he had spent doing that kind of work in his younger days. Another astronaut, Thomas Jones, who carried out 3 spacewalks, described a faint, acrid odour, something like ozone or burnt gunpowder or hot electrical equipment. Seared steak, hot metal, welding fumes, burnt gunpowder. It is a strange and specific and surprisingly consistent list, and it is not the list anyone would have guessed for the smell of nothing. The key to the mystery is in a detail that is easy to miss. The astronauts cannot smell this while they are actually outside in the vacuum. Out there, sealed inside the spacesuit, breathing bottled air, everything just smells faintly of plastic and machinery, the ordinary smell of the suit itself. The smell of space only arrives at a very particular moment, when they come back inside. When the spacewalk is over, and they climb back into the airlock and the air comes rushing back in around them, when they repressurize and finally lift off the helmet, that is when the odor hits them. It is clinging to the suit, to the gloves, to the tools they were holding, to the metal handrails they were gripping out in the vacuum. The smell is not floating freely in space. It is riding back inside on the surfaces of everything that was exposed to space, and that is the clue that cracks the whole thing open. The smell is not the smell of the vacuum itself. It is the smell of what happens when things that have been sitting in the vacuum suddenly meet air again. Out in space, the surfaces of the suit and the tools are bombarded by 2 things in particular. They are blasted by raw ultraviolet light from the unfiltered sun, and they are struck by something called atomic oxygen, single, lone oxygen atoms that drift in the thin upper reaches where the astronauts work. Extremely reactive because a lone oxygen atom desperately wants to bond with something. So the exposed surfaces get chemically charged up, dosed with energy, and studded with these hungry reactive atoms over the course of the spacewalk. And then the astronaut comes inside and warm, moist, pressurized cabin air floods over all of it at once. All those energized, reactive surfaces suddenly have something to react with, and they do. The reactions release their little cargoes of byproduct molecules, and those molecules drift up into the astronaut's nose, and the brain reports seared steak, hot metal, welding fumes. In other words, the suit is off-gassing the chemistry of its exposure to space the instant that air touches it. The smell is real. The molecules reaching the nose are real, but they are not molecules from the vacuum. They are molecules created in the meeting between the vacuum-scarred surface and the returning air. The void does not smell of nothing after all, but not because the void is secretly full. It is because the void changes everything it touches, and those changes announce themselves the moment they come back into the light and the air. Imagine the moment itself. Picture an astronaut who has spent hours outside doing careful, exhausting work in the hard vacuum, the whole planet turning silently beneath them the entire time. Now, the work is done. They have come back into the airlock, the outer hatch is sealed, there is a hiss, and then a rising pressure, and the sound of it, as air returns to a place that had none. The suit, which was rigid and ballooned in the vacuum, softens as the pressure equalizes, and then the astronaut reaches up, unlatches the helmet, breaks the seal and lifts it off, and it arrives all at once. That sharp, metallic, seared, welded, scorched smell, rising off the gloves and the fabric and the metal they were holding an hour ago, in a place with no air at all. They are, in the most literal possible sense, smelling where they have just been. They are breathing in the signature of the void carried home on the surface of a glove. What makes the space smell so persuasive as evidence is precisely that it was not one person and not one mission. It is a report that has recurred across decades and across programs, from different agencies and different nations, given by people who had every professional reason to describe things accurately and no reason at all to invent a shared poetry about burnt steak. And the descriptions cluster so tightly. When many independent, careful people, who have never compared notes, all reach for the same handful of words, hot metal and seared meat and welding fumes and spent gunpowder, that convergence is itself a kind of data. It tells you there is a real, consistent physical thing being smelled, not a private impression. The suits have even been reported to carry the smell for a while after the astronauts come inside, the odour lingering on the fabric and the tools until it slowly fades, as though the vacuum signature needed time to finish evaporating back into the ordinary air of the cabin. Some astronauts have said they can still catch it faintly on their gloves hours later, a last trace of where they have been. There is something quietly moving about that image, and something that fits the deeper theme of tonight. The vacuum of space is the emptiest, most inhospitable, most nothing place a human being can go. And yet it leaves a mark. It touches everything that ventures into it, and it sends that touch back inside on the skin of a suit, as a smell you cannot mistake for anything else. Nothing, it turns out, is never quite as empty as it looks. Remember that, because we're going to keep meeting it. The dark that glows, the empty solar system that is full of dust, and at the very end, the shielded cabin that is not shielded at all. But we have been climbing through wonders that, however astonishing, all have clean and satisfying explanations, and I want to be honest with you about that pattern, because we are about to reach the exact point where it starts to matter. So the next entry is the one that makes the pattern visible. It is the story of the very first impossible thing that a human being reported from orbit at the dawn of the space age. It was a genuine mystery for a little while, and then it got an answer. And understanding how that answer arrived is going to be the key that lets us judge everything that comes after it fairly. On the 20th of February, in the year 1962, a man named John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. He rode up alone inside a tiny capsule called Friendship 7, a cramped little bell of metal barely larger than he was, and he went around the whole planet 3 times. It is difficult now to fully feel how far out on the edge of the unknown he was. Almost no human being had ever been where he was going. The engineers were not entirely sure what he would find, or what would happen to a person up there. He was, in the truest sense, a scout at the very frontier of human experience, radioing back his observations to a nervous world listening below. And on that flight, at his very first orbital sunrise, John Glenn looked out of the small window of his capsule and saw something that no one had prepared him for. The space around Friendship 7 was full of thousands of tiny glowing particles. They drifted and floated all around the capsule, brilliantly lit, shining like little stars or like sparks, or, as the moment entered legend, like fireflies. He was surrounded by them, a slow swirling cloud of luminous specks hanging in the void outside his window. Glenn, the careful test pilot, reported exactly what he saw, in words that have echoed ever since. There are literally thousands of them, he said. He described them as looking like little stars, a whole field of them, luminous, drifting past. And they had a curious behaviour. They appeared at sunrise when the sun first came up over the edge of the Earth and lit them, and then as the sun climbed higher they faded and vanished. For a little while, this was a real mystery, and it was a mystery of the most dramatic possible kind. An unexplained sighting, radioed down live from the first American in orbit, a man alone at the frontier describing thousands of glowing objects surrounding his spacecraft. You can imagine how that would land. You can imagine the room full of engineers on the ground glancing at each other. What was he seeing? What were these thousands of shining things swarming a spacecraft in a place no human had ever been? The imagination runs immediately to the exotic and the profound, to the idea that at the very threshold of space, humanity had encountered something waiting for us there. And then the answer came, and it was both utterly ordinary and quietly beautiful. Later that same year, another of the early American astronauts, a man named Scott Carpenter, flew a similar mission in a capsule called Aurora 7. And during his flight, Carpenter happened to knock his hand against the inside wall of his capsule, and in that instant a fresh swarm of the mysterious fireflies shook loose and appeared outside his window. He had jostled them free, and that was the whole answer, right there. The fireflies were not out in space waiting for us. They were coming off the spacecraft itself. They were tiny flakes of frost and ice, condensation that had frozen onto the cold outer skin of the capsule, breaking away and drifting off into the space around it. And when the low light of the orbital sunrise caught those tiny ice flakes, each one flashed and glittered like a little star. They faded as the sun rose higher, simply because the lighting angle changed. Thousands of glowing objects surrounding the spacecraft, and every one of them was a speck of frost off the ship's own hull, lit up by the dawn. I want to slow down here, because this entry, more than any other so far, is the key to the whole night, and it is not really about the fireflies at all. It is about the shape of what just happened, because that shape is going to repeat, and it is going to matter enormously how we handle it. Watch the pattern. A trained, reliable observer, one of the most carefully selected people alive, reports something that genuinely sounds impossible. For a moment, the thing hangs there unexplained, and the mind reaches, almost helplessly, toward the extraordinary. And then a simple, physical, completely mundane explanation arrives, and it does not diminish the sight at all. Knowing that the fireflies were ice flakes does not make John Glenn's experience less wondrous. If anything, it makes it more so, because now you understand that a man at the edge of the world was watching the frozen breath of his own spacecraft glittering in the first light of an orbital dawn. The wonder did not vanish when the mystery was solved. It changed its address. It moved from what is that to look at what that actually is. Let me put the pattern plainly, because it is the tool we're going to need for the rest of tonight. So far, on this entire list, everything impossible has had an answer. Every single thing. The broken clock of 16 sunrises, geometry and speed. The glowing dark, the chemistry of the upper air, the shining clouds at the edge of space, ice on meteor dust lit from below the horizon. The shooting stars beneath you, your own altitude. The curtains of light you look down into. The sun's particles striking the air. The upward lightning. Real physics we simply could not see from the ground. The smell of the void. Reactive surfaces meeting returning air. And the thousands of fireflies at the frontier, frost off the hull. Every impossible thing so far has quietly dissolved into physics the moment we looked closely enough. Not one of them has required us to abandon what we know about the world. They only required us to abandon the assumption that where we happened to be standing was the whole of reality. This is the ground we're standing on, and I want you to feel how solid it is right now, in this moment, at the middle of our climb. Because this is the point where the path begins to tilt. Everything we have seen so far has been fully explained. The entries that are coming are going to test that comfort. Some of them will still have answers, good ones, and I will give them to you honestly. But we are also, for the first time, going to approach the edges of what is explained. We are going to meet a couple of things that trained observers reported, and that no one has ever cleanly resolved. And when we get there, this entry, John Glenn's Fireflies, is the discipline we will carry with us. First, always, we assume the ordinary answer. First, always, we look for the frost on the hull. Because most of the time, that is exactly what it is. And the discipline of assuming the simple explanation first is the only thing that earns us the right to be genuinely surprised on the rare occasions when the simple explanation does not come. But before we reach those edges, there is one more sight that seems to break the deepest rule of all, the rule that the space between the stars is pure and empty black. And it turns out that even that darkness, the plain nothing between the worlds, has been quietly lit the entire time. We have already caught the dark air of our own night glowing, and we have caught the highest clouds shining after sunset. But surely you might think, once you get past all of that, once you leave the atmosphere entirely and look out into the true black between the planets, surely there you finally find real emptiness, real darkness, real nothing. The space between the worlds ought to be the purest black there is, a perfect absence of light broken only by the hard points of the distant stars. That is the picture almost all of us carry. The solar system as a scattering of bright worlds hanging in an immense and empty blackness. And yet, if you get yourself to a genuinely dark place, above the air or far from any city, and you look in just the right direction at just the right time, you can catch the black itself glowing. There is a faint, soft, cone-shaped tower of light that reaches up from the horizon along the path the sun and planets follow across the sky, brightest near where the sun has set or is about to rise, tapering to a dim point higher up. It is not the glow of any city. It is not the last of the twilight. It is called the zodiacal light, and it has been quietly present in our sky for the entire history of our species, though most people alive today drowned in artificial light have never once seen it. What is it? It is sunlight. But it is sunlight scattered off something we do not usually think about at all. Dust. The space between the planets, the space we picture as empty, is not empty. It is filled with an immense, thin, diffuse cloud of tiny dust grains, spread out through the whole inner solar system, lying mostly in the flat plane where the planets orbit. This dust is the debris of the solar system's ordinary violence, the crumbled remains of comets that have passed close to the sun and shed their material, and the powder from collisions between asteroids over billions of years. It is spread so thinly that if you were floating out among it you would never notice a thing. But there is so much space for it to fill, across such enormous distances, that altogether this haze of dust catches enough sunlight to glow. The zodiacal light is the collective shimmer of countless dust grains between the planets, each one catching the light of the sun and scattering a little of it toward your eye. And there is a second, even fainter, even stranger member of this phenomenon. If you turn around completely and look at the point in the sky directly opposite the sun, you can sometimes see a very subtle brightening, a faint oval patch of light in the middle of the night sky, hanging exactly at the anti-solar point. This one has its own name, a German word, the Gegenschein, which means counterglow, and it is caused by the very same interplanetary dust, but by a special trick of the geometry. When you look directly away from the sun, you are looking at the dust grains that have the sun directly behind you, fully lit, face on. Those grains reflect sunlight most strongly straight back the way it came, back toward the sun, and therefore back toward you standing between them. It is the very same effect that makes a field of dew-covered grass or a road sign seem to glow most brightly at the exact point directly opposite the sun or opposite your headlights. The dust of the solar system has a bright spot, and the Gegenschein is you looking straight into it. Take these two glows together, the cone of the zodiacal light reaching up from where the sun has set, and the faint counterglow hanging opposite it, and something quietly astonishing comes into focus. You're not looking at objects. You're looking at the shape of the emptiness itself. You're seeing, made faintly visible, the great disk of dust in which our entire solar system is embedded. The planets, the Earth, all of us, are sitting inside an enormous thin haze, softly lit by our star, and on a dark enough night you can actually see the glow of the room we live in. The blackness between the planets is not empty and never was. It is a lit haze, and we have simply never had eyes dark adapted enough, or skies free enough of our own light to notice. For the astronauts, above the air and its scattering and its own faint glow, these subtle lights become far more accessible. Away from the sun's glare in the true darkness of orbit, the zodiacal light stands out as a real and structured feature of the sky, a soft, luminous pyramid rising along the plane of the planets. It is one more entry in the growing list of things that are supposed to be nothing, and that turn out, on closer and darker inspection, to be quietly full. The night that glows, the clouds that shine, the void with a smell, and now the empty solar system revealed as a softly glowing disk of dust with a shape you can trace with your own eye. There is a humbling thought buried in the zodiacal light, and it is worth drawing out. For most of human history, before we drowned our nights in electric light, this glow was a familiar part of the sky. Ancient peoples watched it. Sky watchers of past centuries knew it well, and gave it names and wondered at its meaning, this soft, luminous cone that rose along the path of the sun before dawn and after dusk. It was a normal feature of the human night, and in the space of a few generations we have very nearly erased it from our own experience, not by any change in the sky, but by the light we ourselves pour upward every evening. There are people alive today, in the bright hearts of great cities, who have never seen the zodiacal light, never seen the band of the galaxy, never really seen the depth of a truly dark sky at all. The dust between the planets still glows exactly as it always has. We have simply lit too many lamps of our own to notice. And so there is a strange symmetry to the fact that it took sending people entirely off the planet, above every lamp and every haze, to recover a clear view of a light our ancestors could see any clear night from their own doorways. We climbed all the way into orbit to see again what we had switched off at home. I keep returning to this idea because it is the deep music underneath the whole countdown, and I want it to be fully in your mind before we cross into the stranger territory ahead. Almost everything we call empty is a statement about our own senses, not about the universe. Emptiness, over and over, turns out to be fullness that is too faint, too diffuse, or too well hidden for us to have noticed. And there is one more version of this correction waiting, a big one, before we turn toward the entries that live at the edge of what we can explain. Because it is not only the darkness and the emptiness that the atmosphere has been editing for you, it is the colours. Every colour you think you know about the sky and the sun and the stars, it turns out, has been quietly altered by the air, and the astronauts who stepped beyond that air met the true, uncorrected originals for the very first time and found them almost unrecognisable. Think about the sun for a moment, and about what colour it is. If I asked a child to draw the sun, they would reach for the yellow crayon without hesitating, and so would most adults. The sun is yellow. Everyone knows that. It is one of the first facts of the world we learn, so basic that it seems absurd to even question it. The sun is a warm yellow disk in a blue sky, and at sunset it turns orange and red, and these are simply the colours of our star. And yet the astronauts who have been out beyond the air will tell you quietly that this is not true. They have seen the real sun, the one that is not filtered through an atmosphere, and it is not yellow at all. It is a fierce, pure, blinding white. A savage white without warmth or softness, painful to be near, more like the flash of a welding arc than the friendly disk of a nursery drawing. Why the difference? Because the yellow you know is not the sun, it is the air. When sunlight passes through the atmosphere, the air scatters away more of the blue light than the red and yellow, painting the daytime sky blue with the light it steals and leaving the sun looking yellower than it really is. And when the sun is low at dawn and dusk, its light travels through even more air, and even more of the blue and green is scattered out, which is why it reddens toward orange and crimson. All of those beloved colours, the yellow noon sun and the red sunset, are the fingerprints of our atmosphere written across the light. They are an edit. Strip the air away, look at the sun from orbit or from the surface of the airless moon, and you meet the true source, which is a colour so clean and so white and so overwhelming that astronauts describe it as almost hostile, a thing you cannot look at and can barely stand to be near. And it is not only the sun. Consider the sky and the dark. On the ground, even the darkest night sky has a certain softness to it, a slightly hazy quality, because there is always a little scattered light in the air, a little air glow, a little glow from distant towns bouncing off the atmosphere. The black of the night is a gentle black, but the black that the astronauts see, the black of space beyond the air, is different in a way they struggle to put into words. Many of them describe it not simply as dark, but as a black with depth, a black that does not feel like a wall or a ceiling, but like an absence that goes on, an emptiness with a texture and a presence to it. It is not the friendly black of a bedroom with the lights off. It is the black of something genuinely without end, and looking into it does something to the mind that the atmosphere has always protected us from. Then there are the stars, and here the correction is one you can almost feel. From the ground, stars twinkle. That twinkling is so bound up with what a star is, in our songs and our poems and our earliest memories, that it seems like part of their nature. But it is not. Twinkling is entirely an effect of our atmosphere. Starlight, after crossing light years of space in a perfectly steady beam, arrives at the top of our air and then, in the last few miles of its journey, gets jostled and bent and wobbled by moving pockets of warm and cool air, so that by the time it reaches your eye it is shivering. That shiver is the twinkle. It is not the star trembling. It is our restless atmosphere shaking the light in the final instant before you see it. Above the air, the stars do not twinkle at all. Every one of them burns as a hard, steady, perfectly still point of light, unblinking, fixed, and there are so many more of them than any ground-based sky reveals that astronauts describe the view as almost overwhelming, a blackness crowded with countless motionless points, none of them wavering, all of them simply and relentlessly there. Photographers who have tried to bring these sights home have run into the same wall the astronauts describe. The cameras cannot hold it. The dynamic range of the real scene, the distance between the blinding white of the sunlit side and the bottomless black of the shadowed side, is so extreme that no film and no sensor can capture both at once. Every photograph from space is a compromise, a flattening, a translation of a scene the human eye could take in but no lens can fully record. Which means that even the famous images you have seen, the ones that seem so vivid, are gentler than the truth. The real thing is harsher, brighter, blacker, more absolute. We have never actually shown you space. We have only ever shown you the version of it that a camera could survive. There is one more colour correction that catches people off guard, and it is about shadows. On Earth, shadows are never truly black, because our air is always scattering a little light around, filling in the dark side of things with a soft ambient glow. Even in the shade at noon you can see perfectly well because the whole sky is a giant soft lamp bouncing light into every shadow. In space, there is no air to do that. Sunlight travels in perfectly straight lines, and nothing scatters it into the shadows, so the shadows are absolute. An astronaut's face lit on one side by the raw white sun can have its other side fall away into a blackness so total that it seems to vanish. Objects become half brilliant and half gone. The gentle, forgiving, everywhere light that we take completely for granted, the light that softens our whole world, simply is not there, and the result is a landscape of savage contrasts, of blinding white and bottomless black meeting along a hard edge with nothing in between. Put all of this together and you arrive at something quietly disorienting. Nearly every colour you associate with the sky, the sun, and the stars is not a property of those things at all. It is a property of the air you live at the bottom of. The yellow sun, the blue sky, the red sunset, the twinkling stars, the soft and forgiving shadows, the gentle black of night. Every one of them is an edit, a translation, a version of reality that the atmosphere has been rendering for you your entire life without your ever knowing it was doing so. The astronauts stepped outside that translation and met the raw originals, and the originals were so unfamiliar that describing them, bringing them home in words, turns out to be one of the hardest things they're asked to do. How do you describe a white you have never seen, a black with depth, a star that will not blink? The colours of your whole life, it turns out, were a kindness the air was doing you, and beyond the air the universe does not bother to be kind about its colours. Now, notice what has been happening across these last several entries, because we have crossed a quiet line without announcing it. For the first part of tonight, the impossible things were all firmly outside. Sunrises, clouds, meteors, auroras, lightning. Then the smell brought the strangeness onto the astronaut's own body, on the surface of a glove. And now, with these colours, the strangeness has moved even closer, into the astronaut's own perception, into the way their eyes and mind take in the world. The list has been slowly turning inward, and with the next entry, it crosses fully over. Because the next impossible thing that astronauts have reported is not something they saw at all, not a light or a colour or an object. It is something they felt, a feeling so powerful and so unexpected in a place of such danger that the doctors on the ground did not quite know what to make of it and watched it with a certain worry. On the 3rd of June, in the year 1965, a man named Ed White opened the hatch of his Gemini spacecraft and floated out into the void, becoming the first American to walk in space. He was tethered to the capsule by a long cord, drifting free above the entire turning Earth, holding a small handheld device that let him push himself gently through the emptiness. And by every account, including his own, what happened to him out there was one of the most purely joyful experiences a human being has ever had. He was elated. He moved through the void with a kind of delight, the whole blue planet wheeling beneath him, and he did not want it to end. And that is the part that matters for tonight. When the time came for the spacewalk to be over, when Mission Control gave the order to come back inside the capsule, Ed White did not want to obey. He was reluctant, openly and audibly reluctant to end it. In the recordings of that flight you can hear it, a man being gently but firmly told to come home and not wanting to, drawing the moment out, staying in the wonder of it as long as he possibly could. And as he finally, reluctantly, made his way back toward the hatch, he said something that has stayed with people ever since. He called it the saddest moment of his life. The saddest moment of his life. Not because anything had gone wrong, because it was ending, because he had to leave. Now let me place you there, because this is one of the emotional hearts of the whole night, and it deserves to be felt and not just described. Picture the man. He is a test pilot, an Air Force officer, chosen and trained precisely for his steadiness under pressure, for his discipline, for his ability to keep his head when everything is on the line. This is not a dreamer given to flights of fancy. This is one of the most controlled and capable people alive, and he is floating at the end of a tether, with nothing beneath him but 200 kilometers of empty air, and then the whole rotating body of the Earth in one of the most dangerous situations a person can be in, a thin suit and a thin cord between him and death. And the order comes to return to safety, and the disciplined test pilot does not want to come in. He lingers, he delays, and when at last he must, he grieves it and calls it the saddest moment of his life. The danger, in that instant, was not what frightened him. The danger was that it was too beautiful to leave. Ed White was not malfunctioning, and he was not alone in what he felt. As more people went to space, this overwhelming, sometimes tearful, sometimes almost spiritual flood of feeling turned up again and again. An astronaut named Rusty Schweikart, during a spacewalk on the Apollo 9 mission, described a euphoric sense of connection and timelessness, a feeling that the boundaries between himself and everything he was seeing had softened. Edgar Mitchell, who walked on the moon during Apollo 14, described being overwhelmed on the journey home by a profound sense of unity, a blissful, almost overpowering feeling that everything, the Earth, the stars, himself, was part of a single connected whole. This experience became common enough and consistent enough that in the year 1987 a writer named Frank White gave it a name that has stuck ever since. He called it the overview effect, the deep cognitive and emotional shift that so many astronauts report when they see the entire Earth hanging in the black, small and whole and alone, and something in them rearranges permanently. For a long time the doctors and the flight surgeons watched all of this with a certain unease, and it is worth understanding why, because it reveals how genuinely strange this feeling is. There are other situations in which human beings, placed in unusual and dangerous environments, are flooded with a similar inexplicable euphoria. High-altitude aviators have long reported something they call the break-off phenomenon, a feeling of being cut loose from the Earth, a strange serene detachment and exhilaration that can come over a pilot flying very high and very alone, a sense of unreality and of separation from everything below. And deep-sea divers know an even more dangerous cousin of it, something they call the rapture of the deep, a nitrogen-induced euphoria that can seize a diver who goes too deep, filling them with a dreamy, careless bliss that has killed people, precisely because it feels so wonderful that they forget they are in mortal danger. A feeling of overwhelming well-being in a place that can kill you in seconds is not obviously a safe thing. It can dissolve exactly the caution that is keeping you alive. So the doctors watched space euphoria warily, unsure whether this flood of joy was a gift or a hazard, a blessing or a warning sign. And this is why space euphoria belongs on a list of impossible things that astronauts have seen, even though it is not a thing seen out a window at all. Because it turns the whole premise of the night inward in a way nothing before it has. Every entry until now has been about the universe out there doing something we could not believe. This one is about what the universe out there does to the person who goes into it. The impossible thing is not in the sky. It is in the astronaut. It is the discovery that stepping outside the world into a place of absolute danger and absolute emptiness can flood a human being not with terror, as every instinct would predict, but with a joy so complete that a hardened test pilot weeps to leave it and comes home changed for the rest of his life, and it does not end when the flight ends. That is the part that lifts space euphoria out of the category of a passing thrill and into something stranger and more lasting. Many of the astronauts who felt the overview effect most strongly came home changed in ways that lasted the rest of their lives. Some turned toward the environment, having seen with their own eyes how thin and shared and borderless the living skin of the planet really is. Some turned inward, toward questions of meaning and connection they had never much considered before. Edgar Mitchell, who felt that overwhelming sense of unity on the way back from the moon, spent much of the rest of his life exploring what it had meant, unable to simply set it down and walk away. These were not mystics who went looking for a revelation. They were pilots and engineers, practical people, and something happened to them out there that reached past all their training and rearranged them at a level they had not known was open to being rearranged. A feeling strong enough to change the direction of a life, arriving unbidden in the most hostile environment a human being can enter, is a genuinely remarkable thing, and it belongs on any honest list of the impossible things space does to the people who go there. We do not fully understand it, even now, and I will not pretend that we do. It is surely made in part of pure wonder, of the overwhelming beauty of seeing the whole Earth at once. It may involve, as well, the strange effects of weightlessness on the body, the shifting of fluids, the altered signals from the inner ear, the sheer novelty of an environment nothing in our evolution prepared us for. It sits in that honest middle ground, a real, repeatable, well-documented phenomenon whose complete cause we have not yet pinned down. And that middle ground is exactly where we now find ourselves standing, as a countdown that began in the safe territory of fully explained wonders arrives at the edge of what we can account for. Because we have now reached the part of the night I promised you and warned you about back at the Fireflies. We have run out of the easy entries. From here the ground is less certain, and the very next entry is the one where I have to be most careful and most honest with you, because it is about the sightings that did not get a clean answer. Not most of them. Most orbital mysteries, as we've seen again and again, dissolve into ice and debris and reflections the moment you look closely, but not all. And the difference between an honest guide and a dishonest one, on a night like this, is entirely about how you handle the ones that are left over. I have spent a good part of tonight showing you how impossible sights dissolve into ordinary explanations. The Fireflies were frost. The upward lightning was real physics we simply could not see. The smell of the void was reactive surfaces meeting the air. Over and over the pattern has held. Assume the simple answer, look for the frost on the hull, and you will almost always find it. And I have to keep faith with that pattern now, even as we step into the territory where it starts to fray, because the temptation here is to abandon all that hard-won discipline in a single exciting leap, and I am not going to do that to you. So let me tell you, carefully and honestly, about the sightings that did not get a caption. Start with the truth about the overwhelming majority of them. Astronauts, over 60 years of spaceflight, have reported a great many unusual objects and lights outside their windows, and when those reports are investigated, the great majority turn out to be perfectly identifiable, and the astronauts themselves are usually the first to say so, because they are careful observers who do not enjoy being made into something they are not. The mysterious object is a flake of ice, like Glenn's fireflies. It is a bolt or a thermal blanket or a fleck of paint that has drifted away from the spacecraft and is catching the sunlight. It is a reflection of a cabin light in the layered glass of the window. It is another satellite, or a piece of orbital debris, glinting as it passes. It is a part of their own spacecraft seen from an odd angle in strange light. Space near a working spacecraft is surprisingly cluttered with the ship's own shed material, all of it lit by a harsh, unfiltered sun against a black sky. And that is a recipe for a great many things that look uncanny for a moment, and then resolve into the ordinary. But not every case resolves. An intellectual honesty requires that I tell you so. There is a small residue of sightings, reported by reliable people, that were never cleanly explained from the evidence available. Let me give you the most often cited example, and let me give it to you exactly as carefully as it deserves. During the Gemini 4 mission in June of 1965, the same mission on which Ed White took his joyful spacewalk, the commander, an astronaut named James McDivitt, reported seeing an object while passing over the Pacific. He described something with an arm or an extension sticking out from it, and he attempted to photograph it. The photographs that came back were inconclusive, blurry, and did not settle the matter, and the sighting was never definitively resolved one way or the other. Now here is the part that matters most. and it is the part that gets left out when this story is told badly. James McDivitt himself, for the rest of his life, was measured and sceptical about what he had seen. He did not claim it was anything exotic. He suspected, quite reasonably, that it was most likely another spacecraft, or a piece of debris, seen under confusing lighting conditions that made it hard to judge its size or distance or shape. He knew, better than anyone, how easily the eye can be fooled in orbit, how a nearby fleck of debris and a distant large object can look identical when you have no reference for scale and the lighting is strange. He reported honestly what he saw, and he declined, honestly, to inflate it into something it was not. That combination, a genuinely unresolved sighting and a witness who refused to sensationalize it, is the model of how this should be handled. So what do we actually make of the leftover cases, the ones with no caption? The honest answer is the least dramatic one, and also, I think, the most interesting. Unexplained does not mean extraterrestrial. Unexplained means unexplained. It means we do not have enough information. It means a careful person saw something, under conditions of strange light and uncertain scale and relative motion, and captured too little of it to ever pin it down afterward. The human eye is a marvel, but it is also easy to fool, especially in an environment as alien as orbit, where nothing is the size or distance or brightness your instincts expect. A small residue of sighting sits permanently in the unknown column, and the correct, disciplined, honest thing to do is to leave it there. Not to fill the unknown with aliens, and not, on the other side, to pretend the unknown does not exist. Just to let it be what it is, a reminder of the limits of a single glance from a moving spacecraft. It helps to understand just how badly the ordinary tricks of scale and light fail a person in orbit, because it explains why even excellent observers end up with a few cases they cannot close. On the ground, your eyes and your brain judge how far away something is, and therefore how big it is, using a lifetime of cues, the way nearer things block farther things, the haze of distance, the known sizes of familiar objects, the ground stretching away to the horizon. In orbit, almost all of those cues are gone. There is no haze, no ground, no horizon in the usual sense, and nothing familiar for scale. A tiny fleck of ice a few feet from the window and a large object miles away can cast the very same image on the eye, and there is often no way, in the moment, to tell which one you are looking at. The harsh, shadowless sunlight makes it worse, flattening shapes and hiding the very contours that might give a thing away, so a careful astronaut can see something perfectly clearly and still be genuinely unable to say how big it was, how far, or therefore what. That is not a failure of the observer. It is a limitation of human vision dropped into an environment it was never built for, and it means that a residue of honest uncertainty is not a scandal or a secret. It is simply the expected result of pointing an Earth-evolved pair of eyes at the strangeness of orbit. I put this entry here, so near the top of the countdown, quite deliberately, and not because these sightings are the most spectacular thing on the list, because they are not. I put it here because everything that follows depends on the trust we build right now, in this moment. In a few minutes I am going to tell you two of the strangest stories of the entire night, and then I am going to make some genuinely large claims about the final and most impossible thing of all. And I need you to know, when we get there, that I have not been reaching for the exotic all along, that I have shown you again and again how the impossible dissolves into the ordinary, that I have told you plainly when the honest answer is I do not know. The bravest and most trustworthy thing a careful observer can ever say is exactly that. I do not know. A handful of what astronauts have seen still lives in that honest space, not as proof of anything, but as a monument to how easily a human eye can be fooled, and how rarely a disciplined one lies on purpose. And now, having built that trust, I am going to spend it on the two strangest entries of the night. Because the next story takes everything we have said about the fragility of human perception, about the ways the mind can be fooled far from home, and pushes it to the very edge. It is the least documented and the most disputed thing on this entire list, and I am going to tell it to you honestly, which means I am going to tell you both how strange it is, and why the most likely explanation lives not out in the sky at all, but inside the exhausted minds of the people who reported it. This is the strangest story on the list, and the least documented, and I am going to tell it to you with both of those things held out in the open the entire time. It comes from the Soviet space program, from a station called Salyut 7 in the year 1984. And I want to be clear before I begin. This is a story that lives mostly in second-hand and popular retellings, not in the sober official records of the mission, and you should hold it loosely the whole way through. But it is worth telling because of where it takes us, and because of what it says about the outermost edge of what human beings have reported from space. Here is the account as it has come down to us. A crew of 3 cosmonauts, men named Leonid Kizim, Vladimir Solovyov, and Oleg Atkov, were deep into a very long mission aboard Salyut 7. Understand what that means physically and mentally. They had been living for months inside a cramped metal can, in weightlessness, far from home, on a rigid schedule of work and exercise and maintenance, cut off from everything and everyone, breathing recycled air, seeing the same few faces and the same few walls day after day after day. Long-duration spaceflight is one of the most sensory-starved, monotonous, and quietly grinding experiences a person can undergo. The body is stressed, the mind is fatigued, and the ordinary anchors of life on Earth are all gone. And then, according to the account, on roughly the 155th day of the mission, something extraordinary happened. The station was suddenly flooded with a brilliant orange light. It poured in through the portholes, warm and intense, bright enough to be almost blinding coming from outside. And when the cosmonauts looked out to find the source of it, the story goes, they saw figures, enormous figures, 7 of them, described as human-like in form but immense in scale, keeping pace with the station outside. The account describes these figures as appearing to have wings and faces and a serene, watchful presence, pacing the spacecraft for around 10 minutes before the light faded and they were gone. The story does not end there. It continues that some days later, after a second crew arrived at the station aboard a Soyuz spacecraft, including a cosmonaut named Svetlana Savitskaya, along with Igor Volk and Vladimir Janibekov, the phenomenon returned. Once again, the account says, the station filled with that warm orange light, and once again the great figures appeared outside, now witnessed by the whole expanded crew, described this time as being on the scale of an airliner, enormous luminous shapes pacing the station in the void. That is the story. And now I have to do the honest work, the work this whole night has been preparing us for, because if I told you that story and then simply let it hang there glowing, I would be betraying everything we have built together tonight. So let us do with this exactly what we did with John Glenn's Fireflies. Let us assume the ordinary explanation first and see how far it takes us, and it turns out it takes us all the way. Begin with the documentation, because it matters. This account is poorly sourced. It appears mainly in popular retellings, in the sensational corners of the literature, passed from telling to telling, growing a little in each. It does not appear in the careful official records of the mission. That alone should make us cautious, because extraordinary events witnessed by multiple trained crew members do not usually vanish from the sober record while flourishing only in the dramatic one. When a story lives only in the exciting version and not in the careful version, that is itself a kind of evidence. Now consider the human beings at the center of it. These were cosmonauts months into one of the most extreme and depleting experiences available to our species. Exhaustion, isolation, monotony, disrupted sleep, and relentless stress are not minor footnotes here. They are precisely the conditions under which human perception becomes least reliable. The tired brain, starved of variety and rest, is powerfully prone to finding pattern and meaning in ambiguous input. And of all the patterns the human mind is primed to find, the very strongest is the human figure and the human face. We are built, down to the wiring, to see faces. We see them in clouds, in wood grain, in the fronts of cars, in the shadows of a dark room. A tired, isolated crew, suddenly confronted with a strange light and ambiguous shapes, is very nearly the perfect setup for the mind to assemble figures out of formlessness. And what of the orange light itself? A sudden flood of warm orange light in a spacecraft is not, in fact, mysterious. The astronauts of this very list have described the fierce colours of unfiltered sunlight, the way an orbital sunrise can flood a cabin, the reflections and glints that dance off spacecraft surfaces and window layers. An orbital sunrise, a reflection, light scattering off venting gas or off some part of the station itself, any of these can wash a module in sudden intense colour. Give that light to an exhausted mind already straining for meaning, and the raw material for the whole account is present without a single thing from beyond the ordinary being required. And there is one more factor, the most human of all, and the one that makes the group version of the story less rather than more convincing. In a small, isolated, tightly bonded group under extreme stress, perception and belief are contagious. If one exhausted person, in a strange light, says "I see something," and another strains to see it too, the group can rapidly converge on a shared experience, each member's report reinforcing the others, a single suggestion blooming into a collective vision. The fact that more people reported it does not make it more real. Under these conditions, it can make a shared misperception more likely, not less. So the grounded explanation is not only available, it is more than sufficient. An exhausted, isolated crew, a mind built to see figures and faces, a sudden ordinary flood of coloured light, and the contagious nature of perception in a close and stressed group. You do not need anything from beyond the sky to explain what was reported. The most likely location of those 7 figures was never outside the glass. It was inside the tired minds of the people who saw them, and here is why, even so, this belongs so near the top of tonight's list, at number 3, when it is probably not real in any external sense at all. Because look at what it does. Look at where it leaves us. Every impossible thing we have met tonight until the last 2 entries was out there, something in the sky or the air or the void, separate from the observer, waiting to be seen. But this story, once we understand it, is not really about the sky at all. It is about the observer. It is about what a human mind does when it is pushed far enough from home, held too long in emptiness, worn down past the point where perception can be trusted. The genuinely unsettling thing here is not 7 angels pacing a Soviet space station. The genuinely unsettling thing is the discovery that the frontier we should be most careful about crossing may not be a line in space at all. It may be an internal one, the line past which an isolated human mind, far from everything that anchors it, begins to furnish the darkness with figures of its own making. That is a real and serious matter, and it will only grow more serious as we send people farther, on missions of years rather than months, to Mars and beyond, deeper into isolation than anyone has ever gone. The Salyut 7 story, whatever actually happened aboard that station, is a kind of warning about the fragility of the mind at the edge of human experience. And it leaves us in a strange and vulnerable place, having learned that even our most reliable witnesses can be led astray when pushed too hard, that perception itself can fail. Which is exactly the right place to stand for the next entry, the one just below the summit. Because after all these sights, after the glowing air and the falling stars and the upward lightning and the figures in the orange light, there is one thing that nearly every astronaut sees, and comes home unable to stop talking about, and describes as the sight that changed them more than any other. It is not exotic, it is not disputed, it is the most solid and best documented sight on the entire list, and it may be the most quietly devastating of them all, because it is not about the strangeness of the universe out there. It is about how small and how thin and how fragile is the single thing that keeps every one of us alive. Ask the astronauts what changed them, and a surprising number of them, from many different countries and many different eras, tell you the same thing. It was not the stars, it was not the moon, or the black of space, or the strangeness of weightlessness. It was looking back at the Earth, and more specifically, it was one particular feature of the Earth seen from orbit, a feature so simple that it can be described in a single phrase, and so profound that grown astronauts have wept describing it, and come home permanently altered. It is the atmosphere, the air, seen edge-on from above as a thin blue line hugging the curve of the planet. Here is what they see. When you look at the Earth from orbit, and your eye travels to the edge of the planet, to the horizon where the lit world meets the black of space, you see the atmosphere in profile, and it is thin. Shockingly, almost unbelievably thin. It is a delicate band of blue, glowing softly along the rim of the world, and above it, with almost no transition, is the absolute black of the vacuum. That thin blue band is everything. It is all the air there is. It is the entire sky. It is every cloud that has ever formed, every storm, every wind, every sunset. It is the breath in the lungs of every human being who has ever lived, every animal, every plant. All of it, the whole living envelope of the world, is that fragile glowing rind, thinner than it seems possible for something so total to be, wrapped around a planet and holding in it everything we have ever known. There is a reason this particular sight, out of everything the astronauts encounter, is the one that so often breaks them open. All the other wonders of space are wonders of distance and scale, of things unimaginably far and unimaginably large, and the mind, confronted with the truly enormous, has a way of going numb, of failing to feel what it cannot picture. But the thin blue line does the opposite. It takes the largest thing a person knows, the entire world, the whole of home, and it makes it suddenly small and holdable and heartbreakingly fragile. It does not overwhelm the mind with bigness. It ambushes the heart with smallness. The astronaut who has trained for years, who has ridden a controlled explosion into orbit, who has done difficult and dangerous work with total composure, looks out the window at that fragile band of blue and without warning feels their throat tighten. Because there, right there, is everything. Everyone they love is under that line. Every argument and reconciliation of their whole life, every meal they have ever eaten, every person who has ever meant anything to anyone, all of it is sealed inside a film of air so thin that from here it looks like it could not possibly be enough to hold a single storm, let alone the entire living history of a species. The astronauts describe it not as an ocean of air, the way we think of it from below, but as something delicate, a glaze, a skin, a film, something that looks, from up there, as though you could scratch through it. From the ground, the sky feels infinite. You look up and the blue goes on, and the air seems like an endless sea we live at the bottom of, and above us the atmosphere seems to reach up practically forever. But that is another one of the atmosphere's kind edits, another comfortable illusion of being down at the bottom looking up. Seen honestly, from outside, all of that apparent immensity collapses into a line you could cover with your thumb, a thin blue smear along the edge of the world. And the physics is even more sobering than the sight. If you were to shrink the Earth down to the size of an apple, the layer of atmosphere that we can actually breathe would be thinner than the apple's skin, thinner than the skin of an apple. That is the true proportion of the thing that keeps us alive. The breathable air reaches up only a handful of miles before it thins away to nothing, and the vivid blue line the astronauts see is essentially the whole of it, and above that line, beginning only a few dozen miles over your head, is the same hard vacuum that fills the rest of the entire universe. We are not living at the bottom of a deep and endless ocean of air. We are living inside a film of it, a microscopically thin coating on a small rock, with infinite emptiness pressing in on every side. This is the sight most often credited with producing the overview effect, that profound shift we met a few entries ago. And now you can feel why. It is one thing to know, as a fact, that the atmosphere is thin. It is another thing entirely to see it, to look with your own eyes at the whole of the air laid out as a fragile blue line, and to feel, all at once and in your body rather than your head, that everything you have ever loved is sealed inside that glaze. Every person you have ever known, every city, every country, every war and every piece of music and every act of kindness and every cruelty in all of human history, all of it has happened inside that thin blue film, with nothing above it and an indifferent, endless vacuum on the other side. The astronauts see the fragility of it directly, and it rearranges something in them that does not go back. Let me hold this moment open, because it is the emotional turn on which the whole night pivots. Come back in your mind to that window we started at, all those entries ago. Remember, at the very beginning, I placed you at an impossible pane of glass, with the planet turning below and the Terminator racing across the world. You have learned a great deal since then. You have seen the air glow and the clouds shine, the meteors fall beneath you, and the auroras spread out like a landscape, the lightning leap upward and the void reveal its smell, the colours of your whole life corrected and the strange joy that floods a person out there, the honest unknowns and the figures in the orange light. And now you are back at the window, and your eye travels to the edge of the world and you see it, the thin blue line, holding everyone in. Feel the weight of it, but feel too where the weight resolves, because this is the channel's voice and it is the truth of the thing. The realization does not land, in the astronauts who describe it, as terror. It lands as tenderness. It does not make them feel that the world is doomed. It makes them feel that the world is precious, unbearably precious, precisely because it is so thin and so alone and so fragile. The margin of our survival is impossibly narrow, a skin of blue on a small rock in an enormous dark. And that is not, in the end, a frightening thought. It is a tender one. It is the thought that has made hardened astronauts weep at a window and come home gentler than they left. Everything we have, everything, is held in a line of a light you could hide behind your fingertip, and the only sane response to seeing that is to love it. And now we have arrived at last, at the summit. Everything from the very first entry down to this one has been something out there, on the far side of a window, separate from us, held safely at a distance behind glass. Even the thin blue line, as close to the heart as it comes, is still a thing seen at arm's length, out there beyond the pane. But the final and most impossible thing on this list has no window. There is no glass between the witness and the universe for this one. This is the thing I promised you at the very beginning and made you wait for, the light that seems to come from nothing, appearing inside a closed human eye in a sealed and shielded cabin. And to understand it, you have to let go of the idea that you were ever truly separate from the sky at all. We have come all this way, down through 14 wonders, and every one of them has been something an astronaut looked at, something on the other side of the glass. And now I am going to take the glass away and tell you about the one thing on this list that reaches through it, and through the metal wall of the spacecraft, and through the bone of the skull, and touches the inside of a human eye directly. This is the thing I promised you at the start. This is the light that comes from nothing. It began, as so much of the modern story of space did, on the way to the moon. During the Apollo missions, as the astronauts coasted through the 250,000 miles of empty space between the Earth and the moon, some of them began to notice something they could not explain, and at first were almost reluctant to mention. In the darkness of the cabin, with the lights down, and often with their eyes closed, trying to rest, they saw flashes of light. Not a glow leaking in through the eyelids, not a reflection or a light on the instrument panel, light appearing inside the eye, in the dark, from nowhere. Buzz Aldrin, on Apollo 11, the first mission to land human beings on the moon, was among the first to report it, back in the year 1969, and once astronauts began to speak of it, it turned out to be widespread. Many of them, in the dark and quiet of the journey, were seeing these flashes. They came in different forms, and the astronauts learned to distinguish them. Some were sharp little points of light, like the prick of a distant star suddenly appearing where there was nothing. Some were streaks, thin lines of light that seemed to shoot across the field of view, like a tiny shooting star crossing the inside of the closed eye. And some were softer, diffuse blobs or clouds of light that bloomed and faded, and they were not rare. On the lunar journeys, once their eyes were adapted to the dark, the astronauts averaged something like one flash every 2 to 3 minutes. That is roughly 20 an hour. 20 times an hour in the silent dark of a spacecraft crossing to the moon, a soundless flash of light would appear inside a human eye, from a source that was nowhere in the cabin, that no instrument in the ship could see, that no camera could capture. Only the astronaut, alone behind their own closed eyes, could witness it. Now, this is exactly the kind of report that we have learned tonight to treat with care, a strange sensory experience reported by people in an extreme environment, and you might reasonably wonder whether this was some trick of a tired mind, some pressure phenomenon, some illusion. So notice what the space agency did, because it is one of the most beautiful pieces of careful science on this entire list. They did not dismiss it, and they did not simply believe it. They tested it. On the later Apollo missions on Apollo 16 and Apollo 17, the astronauts wore a special device designed to catch the culprit in the act. It had a name almost too perfect, the Apollo Light Flash Moving Emulsion Detector. It was a frame fitted around the astronaut's head, a little like an oversized fencing mask, and inside it were stacked layers of a special material called nuclear emulsion. Nuclear emulsion is a kind of photographic film so extraordinarily sensitive that it can record the passage of a single charged particle, capturing the very track it leaves as it punches through. And the experiment was elegant in its simplicity. The astronaut would sit in the dark with the detector strapped around their head, and each time they saw a flash they would call it out and note the exact moment and where in their vision it had appeared. Afterward, the emulsion plates could be examined to see whether a particle had passed through the detector, on that side, at that moment. And the correlation held. When an astronaut called out a flash, the plates showed that a high-energy particle had indeed passed through, crossing the region of the astronaut's head at the corresponding time and place. The flashes were not imagined. They were not a trick of exhaustion or pressure or the mind. They were the direct sensory record of individual particles from space passing straight through the astronaut's head and eye. So let me tell you what is actually happening, because it is the deepest and most intimate thing on this entire list. The culprits are cosmic rays. Despite the name, cosmic rays are not rays of light at all. They are particles, mostly the bare nuclei of atoms, protons, and heavier nuclei, stripped of their electrons, flung across the galaxy at nearly the speed of light by the most violent events the universe produces, by exploding stars and other cataclysms far away in space and deep in time. These particles have been racing through the galaxy for millions of years, and they are everywhere, a constant sleet of them crossing all of space in every direction. On Earth, we are shielded from most of them by our atmosphere and by the planet's magnetic field, that same magnetic field that funnels the aurora to the poles. But out in space, on the way to the moon, beyond the protection of that shield, the astronauts were fully exposed to them for the first time, and a cosmic ray does not care about the wall of a spacecraft. It is moving so fast and carries so much energy that the thin metal hull of the ship is very nearly nothing to it. It passes straight through the spacecraft. It passes straight through the astronaut. And on the rare occasions when one of them happens to pass directly through the astronaut's eye, through the retina at the back or through the optic nerve, it interacts with that delicate tissue as it goes. In part, it simply ionizes the tissue, disturbing the cells the way light normally would, triggering the visual system directly. And in part, there is an even stranger mechanism at work called Cherenkov radiation. When a charged particle moves through a transparent medium, like the clear fluid inside the eye, faster than light itself travels through that same medium, it produces a faint cone of actual light, a real glow, in much the way an aircraft moving faster than sound produces a sonic boom. So as the cosmic ray tears through the fluid of the eye, it can leave behind a tiny wake of genuine light. Either way, whether by ionizing the nerve or by that faint glow in the eye's own fluid, the particle sends a signal down the optic nerve, and the brain, receiving a signal on the optic nerve, does the only thing it has ever known how to do with such a signal. It sees light. Sit inside that for a moment. Let me put you there, in the dark, at the summit of the whole night. The cabin lights are off. The long coast between the worlds is silent, the engines quiet, the crew trying to sleep in the strange floating way one sleeps out there. Your eyes are closed. There is nothing to see. And then, against the dark of your own closed eyes, a point of light. Sharp, sudden, clear as a star, hanging for an instant where there is nothing and can be nothing. Then it is gone. A little later, a streak crossing the dark there and vanished. There is no lamp. There is no leak of light from anywhere. There is no screen, no reflection, no instrument glowing. Something has passed through the wall of your ship, through your skull, through the very jelly of your eye, and left a spark of light on its way through you, and gone on, out the other side, and continued on its journey across the universe as though you were not even there. Because to it, you almost were not. You were a fleeting whisper of matter it passed through on a journey of millions of years, and there is a quiet, sobering echo to this that reaches beyond the wonder of it, because the flashes are also a warning. If a single cosmic ray can pass through the eye and the optic nerve and announce itself as a spark of light, then it is also passing through the rest of the brain, through the soft and irreplaceable tissue there, leaving its little trail of disruption behind as it goes. The flash is only the part we can perceive. It is the visible symptom of an invisible dose, a rare moment when one of these particles happens to cross exactly the part of us that can turn its passage into a sensation. For the short trips of the Apollo era, this was a curiosity. But for the long journeys ahead of us, the voyages of years that will carry people to Mars and deeper, out beyond the shield of the Earth's magnetic field for month after month after month, the steady sleet of these particles through the body becomes one of the real and serious hazards of the trip. The same flashes that fill an astronaut's dark hours with silent light are a reminder that space is not gentle with the bodies we bring into it, and that the price of going out there is written, particle by particle, into the very tissue that does the seeing. The beauty and the danger are the same thing, arriving together, the way so much of the deep universe does. Understand now why this is the most impossible thing on the entire list, why it sits at the very summit, why I made you wait for it from the first minute. Every other thing we have seen tonight was out there, beyond the glass, held at a distance, a phenomenon of the sky observed from safely inside. This one has no distance in it at all. The universe does not stop at the window for this one. It reaches through the ship, through the bone, through the eye, and touches the inside of a human being directly, and the person sees a star that is not in the sky, that never was in the sky, that exists only as a spark inside their own head, where a piece of a dead exploded star flung across the galaxy has just passed through them. It is the cosmos writing directly onto a human nervous system. It is, quite literally, light that comes from nothing you could ever point to, because the thing that made it is already gone, already through you and away, and all that is left is the flash it woke in the dark of your closed eye. And here is the turn, the last one, the one this whole night has been climbing toward. Because you might think this is the one entry on the list that belongs only to the astronauts, the one thing the rest of us can never share, safe as we are down here beneath our thick atmosphere and inside our magnetic shield. But that is not quite true, and the untruth of it is the gift at the very top of the mountain. Those same particles are passing through you right now. As you lie there listening, cosmic rays are sleeting through the room you're in, through the ceiling, through your body, through you, thousands of them, quietly, constantly, as they have every second of your entire life. You're not separate from the sky. You never were. The universe has been passing through you this whole time, from the moment you were born, and it will not stop until long after you are gone. The only thing the astronauts had that you do not, in this moment, is the darkness and the stillness and the emptiness to finally notice it happening. That is the secret the whole list has been circling, from the very first rushing sunrise. The calm sky you know is the edited one. The plain dark night, the yellow sun, the twinkling stars, the empty black, the solid ground beneath you. All of it is a gentle, useful illusion, assembled by the air and by distance and by the daylight of a single ordinary star, and by the simple, comfortable fact that you have always been standing too shielded and too distracted to feel the real universe moving through you. The astronauts did not see a different universe than the one you live in. They saw the same one, ours, yours, with the illusion stripped away. And what they found, at the very end, past all the glowing air and the falling stars and the figures in the orange light, was not something alien and far away. It was the discovery that the cosmos was never out there at all. It was here. It was inside them. It is inside you. So the most impossible thing astronauts have ever seen turns out not to be a thing that only they can see. It is a thing that is happening to all of us all the time that we are simply too comfortable to notice. And that, I think, is the gentlest possible ending for a list that began with things that should not exist. Because none of it should exist, by the reckoning of our small everyday intuition, and all of it does, and we are made of the same stuff as the exploded stars whose fragments pass through our closed eyes in the dark. The sky is not a picture you look at from a safe distance. You're inside it. You always have been. And tonight, for a little while, from the quiet and the dark of wherever you're lying, you got to notice it. The way the most reliable witnesses we have finally noticed it, out there in the long silence between the worlds. Rest now. The universe is still moving through you, softly, the way it always has, and it means you no harm. It only means to remind you, one silent particle at a time, that you were never separate from it at all.